PFEP. It's not PPE's cousin. It's actually a way to build data into existing work, among other things. Bruce, can you take us through this at a high level? What is a PFEP?
Hi, Kurt. Thanks. And yeah, there's four letters there, and they stand for something.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's planned for every part, and at its core understanding, it's a change management tool. If you think about the words as they're assembled, the idea of change is sometimes it creates anxiety for people. And the more change you have, the more you need mechanisms to make it repeatable, easier, and something like me, I'm very driven by the visual, and so if you have a tool that can help people go through a change management process that you can almost visualize, it's very helpful and it reduces anxiety. And so the PFEP, or Plan for Every Part, is something that our lean team here at Fastenal has done a great job of creating, building. It's morphed over time because it's it, it's the essence of that tool. It's allowed to change a lot. Um, but again, at its core, it's a change management tool, and its job is to help people organize a lot of information in something that makes almost a narrative if you look at it correctly. And so if you imagine looking at one part that you want to change in somebody's production, there's a lot that can go on with even just a fastener to a print. There's a lot of things that people need to look at on a print, whether it's the form, the fit, the function, the plating, the source, the amount it gets used, how often it gets purchased, when it runs out, everything based on quality. What's its receiving inspection requirement? Is there a PPAP required? Is there a first article required? All of these things on just one part.
Yeah.
Well, if we want to look at working with our customers on potentially taking over not just one fastener, but hundreds, thousands of them, their level of anxiety can increase pretty quickly. If they've been through that change before, I
Yeah.
guarantee they didn't really want to do it again.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that they know there is a process that is repeatable, that we've done before, and it uses a tool that's very, in my opinion, simple, easy to understand, and the devil is in the detail. And we work together with them in order to collect the information and help flow through that change management system.
Okay, so we're thinking about change management when we're thinking about a PFEP. So who should be considering one? Is this for everyone or is this just for certain situations? Wait, actually, feel free to answer that thought, but let me rework the question a bit. Why is a PFEP so useful in a production environment? Take your pick on how you want to handle that.
No, great question, and I understand the overlap there. Uh, in particular, the there's a lot of things, and I mentioned variables before, that can happen
Yeah.
when you introduce change. And in a production environment, anybody that has to put something together knows that, well, if you ever hear the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, it's
Oh, yeah.
because somebody's been through the process of trying to readjust things and still come out with the same result. Well, there's a risk to trying to improve.
Hmm.
The key is to improve without creating too much risk for failure. And the PFEP, Plan for Every Part, what we're doing there is trying to show here's all the components that go through this change process. And again, let's go with the simplest idea of fasteners, that one fastener that is getting its supplier changed. If the manufacturer of that fastener is exactly the same, then the process you're introducing of change is simply the process of supplying the part. But what if on all of them, that's the change that we're offering? Okay, so hundreds, maybe thousands of those. But what if on a few of those, the manufacturer also changes? So we need to make sure that everyone is okay with what are the changes of those manufacturers. What are the critical characteristics that we all have to pay attention to? How long before that change is actually important? There might be enough inventory on hand where we can move that down the road. And so we don't have to address it right away. And so part of that PFEP is the timeline of the change. So we like to break it out into what there's the information about the parts themselves. There's the information about the quality and engineering requirements of those parts. There's the information about the consumption of those parts, usages, EAU, forecast for as good as it can be, and how that forecast influences the consumption and how far out that forecast creates a lag in the supply chain. In other words, you're telling us you're going to use this much. It takes us this long, or your supplier, any supplier, this long to find it and get it approved.
Hmm.
We have to make sure there's never a gap in that. And so, how do you do all that? You spell it all out. There are lots, and I mean lots, of tools out there that do elements of all of this. The PFEP, and we talk a lot about that, is in the core that we have used to explain an Excel spreadsheet. And I know it sounds simple. It's the lowest common denominator of organizing on anything for people. And so it means
Yeah,
that we can share back and forth. But if you
sure.
visualize it on an Excel spreadsheet, on the very left hand side, you put a part number and description in the first couple of columns. And up in the top, your header says part number, description. And then the next group of columns, we give them a green header, and everything in that group of columns is related to quality and engineering. So that's where you're going to put the okay, is there a print? Yes or no? Do we have a copy of the print on hand? Yes or no? What rev is that print? Uh, is there a sample that's been provided? Does that sample meet the print? Yes or no? Uh, if not, here's a column for the comments that our engineers would enter and say, we found, here's the difference between what we found on the sample and what you're saying on the print. Are all the notes on the print up to date? Yes or no? Okay, here's a column that says here are some of the suggested changes for updated standards, whether it's an ASME or ASTM or ANSI, whatever it is.
Right.
So all of the information that's needed for quality and engineering in that first section. Then we tell our customers, because in change management, we want to make sure that every single part of information on those parts, every single part, gets all of that information filled out before we ever take over. And if you've got 1,200, 1,500 line items, then this doesn't look easy. It looks exhausting, as a matter of fact. And so we
Yeah.
have to take a look at now the usage because we want to prioritize resources. We want to prioritize ours as well as our customers. And then we say, okay, let's look at
Hmm.
usage and let's look at available inventory. Based on your usages, here are the ones that, okay, we've got usage on everything according to what you say. Based on your incumbent's inventory position of what they say that you have access to or liability for right now, here's how much inventory is
Hmm.
available based on that and what you say you have on hand for yourself right now. And let's say that we've crossed it over to an off the shelf part. So here's what's available from Fastenal right now in the hub as it is. And we add all those up together. And if your incumbent's inventory position that you're going to be required to take is going to last for a year, 2 years, or 50 years, uh, we don't really need to worry as much about that part and its quality engineering sections during a transition because nothing's going to change.
Right.
That part is there for you to continue to consume. But on the flip side, if based on the usages and based on the inventory positions, we know that that part disappears very quickly in transition and there's a limited number of manufacturers, and they have a very finite time period of how it's manufactured and what it takes to manufacture it, then we had better dial in every piece of information about that quality and engineering section on all the critical characteristics, everything there is to know about it, and what could potentially be substituted in case of a oh no happening in transition of somebody misrepresenting a quantity, somebody misrepresenting availability or the production time, et cetera. Because in production, things happen. And so
Yep.
we try to manage through the biggest risks. And that's what the PFEP does, is it allows us the ability to organize the parts in a way that we can prioritize the parts that are most risky.
Okay. So we're talking about having a plan for every part. We're talking about doing that in the hundreds, sometimes thousands. And we're talking about spreadsheets. Who's doing the work here? Some folks love spreadsheets. Some folks are like me, and maybe they don't love them. How heavy of a lift is a PFEP for somebody who's interested?
Totally understand. And again, that can create the anxiety, and that's part of the resource I'm talking about. Uh,
Yeah.
but in its essence, if we're going to look at doing a market analysis or a market test or a quote on these parts, there's got to be a list that's generated anyway. So that's the start.
Yeah.
Here's the part, here's the description. We have to start collecting all that information in that quality and engineering section. We, Fastenal, or whoever is going to be going through this process, needs to own that here's the information we've received and then be able to provide it back in a customer facing version that says, here's what we believe we've assessed on this. Please review it and make adjustments because we need to be on the same page. So it's a collaboration. It works together, but the heavy lifting really is on Fastenal in this process to generate it. Then we rely on usage coming from the customer to fit with all of those parts. We rely on forecasts coming from the customer to be 100% accurate. That's sarcasm. Uh, we take that forecast information. We want to use, but everybody understands, okay, it's a
The
forecast.
real world gets very real.
And exactly, exactly. And so we assess all of this together with the customer, back and forth, especially on the critical components. Again, it has to go back to which ones are important, which ones are less important because of it's available and there's no change that's really gonna happen to them other than how we handle that product, what technology. And that's also part of that PFEP on the Fastenal side is, okay, before that part was in building one, section 3, line 2, and in uh, you know the supermarket that was in supported by rack 5 and row 2. Okay, now it's on our RFID at the line, and it's going to be supported right to this line. Okay, that's in there so that anybody can look up a planogram and say, where is this part available? Boom, pops up. So all that information back and forthing. Our lean team is they're such experts, and
Mhm.
my head is always off to what they come up with. But these Excel spreadsheets are the foundation. Now, of course, they're using smart sheets, they're using other applications that really help them coordinate all this information. The engineering teams and the quality teams are doing tons to populate that quality and engineering section. But that lean project manager, that's the owner. That's the person, the collector of all the data inputs, the manager, and they work with the local teams and the customers on, hey, here's what we've assembled. Please review this to confirm it fits. And then that is the collective of understanding, the baseline we have to have.
So I'm going to do a poor man's recap of everything I think I've just heard. You're going to tell me that I am right on or way off, and I think I'm going to finish with a question here. Let's try this. PFEPs build trust basically by reducing risk during transitions. They're a change management tool. They provide clarity and control over every part, and that's something that you can tap into regardless of whether or not you're actually in the middle of a transition. You could just choose to implement a PFEP, and then they take data and they turn it into a strategic asset. So if I boil those three down, I think I'm right so far. If I boil those three down, it basically sounds like a PFEP is a tool to make implementations trustworthy while building that data into an existing supply chain. Is all that an oversimplification?
Kurt, it's almost like you were listening. That, I think, was well done on recapping. And it is the goal that we have for the relationship with our customer. We just want to show them, hey, look, here's a process that we've used hundreds of times in taking over gigantic projects.
Yeah.
And with a few exceptions, which always exist, this has really proven itself out over and over again to help manage this process. And what it really does is it helps us focus in on what we all need to pay attention to on the high anxiety areas and not have to probably identify what we don't have to worry about as much on some of the things that should be good as they are. So, yeah, great description.
Let's end on this. I think we're at a point where we can talk about, in your opinion, what advice does somebody who's looking at this need before they start their own PFEP journey?
Um, People, when they're starting major projects, always want to look at where do you start. And to me, the idea is always going to be what information do we have and have we identified that's important, and what's the end result we want to get to. All right, so this Excel spreadsheet is the tool we have, at least to start, uh, to start gathering the information. And so, what information can we gather? We can get part numbers. We can find out what prints are needed, what prints are available. We can start finding out who the people are that are the owners or gatekeepers of that information. We can start finding out who needs to review the things once we've put them in a spreadsheet to confirm that it's the right thing. And then looking at what we want to finish with, we give that back and forth on when we're done. This is an example. These top 3 or 4 lines are, this is an example of what you're going to see. Does this hit all of the important parts that you believe work through this process? If we have all of this information times all of the parts we're going to get through, does that cover it? Or do we need to add more columns of information? Because we can. It's an add or delete. So that's where I would say that's where you start.
Okay. Bruce, I feel smarter. Thank you for your time talking today.
Kurt, I have a feeling you woke up every bit as smart as what we are right now. But thanks for saying it, and I hope it helps the folks that use the plan for every part.